Welcome to this week's edition of Outdoors Online, a weekly webcast produced by the North Dakota Game and Fish Department. I'm your host, Mike Anderson. My guest this week is Scott Gangle, Fisheries Management Section Leader here at the Game and Fish Department. Scott, we have the Darkhouse Spearfishing season opening December 1st. Give me a little background information on that season.
Well, we've had a Darkhouse Spearfishing season since 2001 in North Dakota. Prior to that, Darkhouse spearing wasn't legal in North Dakota, but it was popular in other states, and we had gotten quite a few requests, and the legislature instituted a season beginning in 2001.
It's a little different than your average day of ice fishing. Walk me through a process of Darkhouse spearfishing.
Well, the big difference with Darkhouse spearfishing, there's a couple of differences from regular ice fishing. Probably the biggest one is that you need a larger hole, because you're going to be looking through the ice and watching for a pike to come by to spear. So it usually starts with chopping a larger hole in the ice, and then you're also using a darkhouse, which is how it gets its name, Darkhouse spearfishing, because of the light that reflects off the surface of the water in the wintertime. You need a dark environment that you can sit in so that you can see into the water. So people have usually either a special ice house that they construct just for Darkhouse spearfishing, or they'll take a regular ice house and block off the windows or to block out the light. And so those are some of the main differences between that and regular fishing.
What are some of the other equipment needs for Darkhouse spearfishing? You said darkhouse, decoy.
Obviously the spear is a pretty important part, and a lot of people you can buy commercially bought spears. You can, some people make their own spears, they weld them. We do have regulations as far as how big the spear can be. There's a maximum size to it so that you don't have some sort of massive contraption out there. But a spear can be at up to 12 inches wide and have multiple points on it. The points are barbed so that when you spear a pike, it doesn't come off, it doesn't slide off right away, so you can retrieve the pike. The other thing that a lot of people will have is some way to cut a hole in the ice. And there are commercially made ice saws, like a big hacksaw that you can cut a hole. But what a lot of people will do is they'll just use their ice auger and drill multiple holes and connect them, and then pull out the chunk of ice that remains in the middle. So there's a few different ways of doing it, but those are probably the most important pieces of equipment. And then the other piece of equipment is a decoy, or something to attract fish, the pike, into your spearing range.
Sure, so when you're in the ice, the darkhouse, you're basically lifting up the string hooked to the decoy, and that kind of attracts predator fish like northern pike?
Yeah, and everybody has a little bit different technique. Some people like to jig their decoy, some people like to let it sit steady, and it just depends on how active the fish are in that particular day or that particular lake. And so decoys are kind of a point of pride for a lot of people. A lot of people like to make their own decoys. They'll make them with fins so that they'll swim around when they jig it, or some of them just remain stationary. So it's kind of an interesting art form to add to your fishing experience.
Any other game fish legal to spear?
At this time, no, you cannot spear anything other than northern pike as far as game fish go. You can spear non-game fish, and our regulations spell out what's a game fish, and then everything else is non-game fish. So if you see a sucker or a carp or something like that come through your hole, it's legal to spear those. But the only game fish that you can spear are northern pike.
Okay, and Darkhouse spearfishing is open statewide, but there are certain lakes that aren't legal to spear.
Right, when we first instituted the season, we were kind of conservative. We didn't know how many people would participate, and we didn't know how much of an impact it would have on our state fish. The northern pike is our state fish, so we wanted to be somewhat conservative on that. So we used to limit the number of lakes that were open to spearing year-round. I think it was about 2012 when we had a lot of pike lakes. We've got more pike now than we probably had ever across the landscape, but certainly more than when we started the season in 2001. And so we opened it statewide. You can spear anywhere in the state with the exception of a handful of lakes that we have muskies in. And those lakes, we wanted to keep them off limits because it can be really hard to tell the difference between a pike and a muskie, and especially if you're just looking straight down on them, they can look really similar. So right now we've got the lakes that we have established muskie populations in closed to Darkhouse spearfishing. One note of caution is that there are a few new lakes that we've added muskies to. Lake Ashtabula is a big one. We have not put that one on the list yet, close to Darkhouse Spearfishing, but it is not legal to spear muskies. So people who are spearing on Ashtabula need to be aware of that. And once we establish a population of muskies there, we may close that to Darkhouse spearing as well.
Are your daily limits the same as they are when you're ice fishing? And is your spear considered a line?
Yeah, and just like fishing, you know, the same daily limits apply, the same possession limits apply for northern pike. So it's 5 per day and 10 in possession. And it's the same as fishing. When you're Darkhouse spearing, your spear counts as a pole, okay? And when you're ice fishing, you can have a maximum of 4 poles or lines to fish from. So you could theoretically have 3 tip-ups out and your Darkhouse spear and be legal. The other option that some people have is they will fish through their Darkhouse hole. That used to be illegal. You couldn't fish through a hole bigger than, I think it was 12 inches.
Okay.
But we kind of cleaned up our regulations a few years ago and said, no, you can fish through your Darkhouse hole, or you can fish through any hole. There's no limit on the size of the hole, but the holes must be marked if they're 12 inches or bigger.
Okay. And how about a hook on a decoy? That's also considered a line, right?
Well, if you can put a hook on your decoy, but that would be considered as another line. So now you've got your spear, that's considered as a line because it's a method of take. Or you could have a hook on your decoy. So if a pike comes in and actually hits the decoy, which they will do from time to time, but that would be considered another line as well.
Any other regulations Darkhouse spear fishermen should be aware of?
Well, the biggest one, again, is that you need to register before you go out. And the registration process is pretty simple. You can do it on our website, and it opens October 1st. So our website, right now, you can go out and register to Darkhouse Spearfish. And that's just a way for us, because this, you know, I guess it's not really new anymore because it's been going on for 16 years now, but it is still relatively new in the grand scheme of things, and we do like to track it. So we use that registration process as a way of tracking how many people are registering, and then we usually do a follow-up survey in the spring to find out how many people actually went out, participated in the sport, and try to track harvest a little bit and see what kind of impact they're having.
For safety purposes, you must mark a hole anything over 10 inches.
Right. Like I mentioned before, you weren't able to fish from a Darkhouse hole, but then when we kind of cleared up and made our regulations a little simpler, we allowed fishing from any size of hole, but any hole over 10 inches need to be marked. And that includes whether you're fishing with a 12-inch auger, because some people do have those big augers, or if you're Darkhouse spearing or whatever you do. Anytime you cut a hole in the ice greater than 10 inches, it needs to be marked. One new regulation that came into effect a couple of years ago is that you now have to have something in your possession to mark the hole, because we were having a lot of issues where people were going out there with good intentions to mark the hole but didn't bring a colored lath or a branch or whatever to mark the hole. And that's what you need to use, is something that's brightly colored, like a wooden lath, or what our regulations say a natural object, which is like a tree branch or something that is visible from at least 150 feet away. And so it's really important that people do that, because we've had issues where you might leave and get a skim of ice over your hole, and if you don't have it marked, if you get a little snow on that, it might insulate it, and now you've got a hazard out there for the public that might come behind you.
Thanks for joining me today, Scott.
You're welcome.
Like Scott just mentioned, in addition to a fishing license, you must register on the Game and Fish website before you decide to go out Darkhouse spearfishing. Also look at a list of lakes where Darkhouse spearing is not allowed, and remember, it's the law to bring something with to mark your hole when leaving. For Fisheries Management Section Leader Scott Gangle and the rest of the staff here at the Game and Fish Department, thanks for joining us this week for Outdoors Online. We'll see you again next week.